everybody, my name is Meredith. NaNoWriMo's over, and we are moving on to other things. So today I am trying out the Snowflake method of outlining to kind of get a better look at the second half of my story to make sure that I'm on the right track for when I continue writing it. This is going to be me reviewing the Snowflake method as a person who is kind of a pantser, but also has really enjoyed plotting and really sees the value in it. So I'll be explaining the 10 steps of the Snowflake method, but also trying them out myself, letting you know how it goes, and giving you pros and cons so that you can maybe see if it could work for you too. I had heard about the Snowflake method just from random writing craft videos. I had never actually seen a video explaining that. I just kind of heard it talked about in passing, and I really wanted to figure out for myself like what it was. And so I haven't watched any videos on this. I'm coming in completely blind, and I think that that's going to give you a pretty good basis for just reading the source material and then telling you what I think about it. First of all, let's do a really quick intro on what the Snowflake method is just to get us oriented. Then I'll go through the 10 steps and let you know how each one of them goes for me. So this book calls itself a creative paradigm. It's on the spectrum of plotter versus pantser. The Snowflake method is somewhere in the middle, but I would argue it's closer towards plotter, but that will come later. It gives you a process that you can follow to take an idea from a spark of a character or a setting or a concept and bring it all the way to something that you're ready to sit down and write. And it's not the flimsiness of pantsing, and it's not the rigidity of plotting. Okay, why is it called the Snowflake method? I think the point of it is that it's supposed to be a geometrical pattern where it can become more and more complex, but overall it still looks like a snowflake, but you can make it more and more complex, more and more detailed, and it's still whole. It's just more and more intricate as you go. But even if you have that very basic level of like, oh, I only know a couple things, but it still makes this whole story, it's still a snowflake. It's just not a very detailed one. And so like the snowflake on the cover of this book, like all these little points around the outside, but you would still think it's a snowflake even if I held it out here and you only saw the 6 different points. And so I think that's what the snowflake is all about. And how that relates to story is that basically the method is to go from really general and go down to specific, get deeper into the story with each kind of round. And so it goes from plotting to character each time you're switching between them. And so it's rounding out the novel, creating something that's balanced as you kind of figure out where you're going with it. My overall impression is that I'm super excited to try this because I do like things that kind of just give me a system that I can just plug in my information and see where it takes me and then modify it as I want to. And so I like trying out these different systems. So I think it's going to have a lot of pros for me. Like I said before, I'm going to be working on my NaNoWriMo novel. So I wrote half of this during November. So I got up to the midpoint. I have not yet written the midpoint, and I'm a little foggy on what needs to happen there. And I really am very, very murky on the rest of the book. So now is a great time to kind of pull back from my headlong race to write 50,000 words and to actually figure out what I'm going to write next. So hopefully this will help me refocus and push towards the end. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to get into the 10 steps of the Snowflake method. Number 1 is to create a summary of your entire book in 25 words or fewer. This is just super, super broad strokes, introduce setting, character, conflict. Okay, I've just written my 1-sentence summary for step 1, and the first time I attempted it, I got it in 45 words, which is like almost twice the length, which is just me, the overwriter. I tried to whittle it down and I got to 35 words, and then I tried one more time and I got to 27 words. So I now have like 3 iterations of this 1-sentence summary. And I basically, just had to cut it down to like inciting incident, new setting, and like a tiny detail about the character. I did include her goal. I feel like that's the most important part is like, who is she and what's the goal that she has? I think in Save the Cat, it teaches you how to write a 1-sentence logline that's way more specific than what they give you in the Snowflake method. And so if you're looking to write a logline, I would look there. I think that they have really good advice. Maybe feel a lot more confident writing a logline with their method, knowing what the right and important information was to put into it. I have now forgotten it, which is why this didn't come out as well. But that's okay. We have a start. Step number 2 involves a tip that I think is actually the most valuable one that I took away from this book. So I want to introduce it now, and it's called the 3 disasters. It introduces this idea that your story needs disasters. And this is because they create excitement, they force decisions, and then they take the book in new directions. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so correct. Like, my book needs more disasters. They are so exciting. And I can just imagine the excitement that I would have as a writer trying to put my character through some more disasters. And I think I've just been a little bit lazy as a writer, not putting more disasters in. The Snowflake method advocates that you don't just put them in willy-nilly, that there are 3 specific disasters that you need, and they come at very specific points every quarter, holding up the story in these 3 spots. I think it really works well with the Save the Cat beats if you think of it as disasters rather than just like the midpoint twist or the all is lost moment. It's like those are 100% disasters. And when you think of it like that, it just makes the stakes feel higher. So I really like that takeaway. So step 2 is to create a 1-paragraph summary of your story using the 3 disasters. And so you have 5 sentences. The first sentence is setup and character. The second sentence is first quarter and first disaster. Third sentence is second quarter, second disaster. Fourth sentence is third quarter, third disaster. And the fifth sentence is the final quarter, the final confrontation, and whether the hero wins, loses, or a combination of both. So you write this paragraph. Okay, I'm now on step 2, and I just wrote out my 1-paragraph summary of my plot. And I'm just realizing that like my disasters are just they're not good enough. They're not big enough. And basically what I do is like I have a horrible disaster as the catalyst. It's like not good. But then I kind of get her into this situation where she's like safe and she can just kind of pursue her goal. And I'm like, maybe that's why like it doesn't have as much like spark as I want it to. But the other thing is I'm about to come up to in where I'm writing my next disaster, which is the midpoint. So I'm really thinking like I need to hone my midpoint disaster and like make it big. Like make it something like catastrophic where these characters are forced to make new decisions and like turn around the direction of where they were going before. And so that actually like makes me really excited rather than making me like upset thinking I have to change things, because I'm like, well, I don't really have to change anything. I just have to like actually plan this the first time. The one thought I had about disasters that is not in the book, but is that disasters do something to people. They build relationships, because like if you've ever been in like a disaster situation with someone, or like a car crash, or like just something bad that's happening, or it could be like an emotional disaster, like it binds you together with that person. And so if you put like a cast of people who don't know each other or don't like each other or come from different backgrounds together, and then you give them some disasters to like encounter and conquer together, they're going to grow closer as people. And so I think that that's one of the best things about like categorizing these checkpoints as disasters, is that it also has implications for the characters and their relationships. And so I really like that. Okay, now that we have talked about plot for a little while and kind of gone a little bit in depth, at least gotten an idea of our whole plot structure in these like disaster moment blocks, then we go on to character. We start with the basic level. So we start with basically a character profile where you list out some really basic things about it's supposed to be all of your main characters, but I'm only going to do this with my 3 most main characters. Some things you want to know are their goal, their major conflict, some of their values, their ambition, and their epiphany. And then for all of them, you're going to write a 1-sentence summary of the plot from their perspective as if they were the hero, and then a 1-paragraph summary of the plot, again from their perspective. I have just done my character sheet for my first main character, my protagonist. That's my point of view character. She is doing great, but I've had a couple thoughts. So I don't think I've ever given my characters values before. I don't know why I've never done that before. Like that gets to the base of like who they are. What is the rock that's kind of built their worldview? But the misbelief is like, to me, a twisted value, like a value that's gone wrong and that kind of needs to be corrected by the end of the book. And that's where their epiphany or their aha moment comes from, is realizing that this value is no good and that they need to change it in order to get what they want or to be a better person or whatever. And so doing these values is making me think like, okay, what more is there besides their misbelief to them? Like rather than focusing on a negative value, let's focus on a positive value. And so I think that this really helped me like round her out and deepen her as a person, and I love that. Also, conflicting values add a lot. So if a character has 2 values that are at odds with each other, they're going to create internal conflict, which is really maybe where that twisted misbelief comes in. And then also if they're conflicting with another character, say the villain, or maybe like the love interest, that can be really, really interesting. It's just like prime fodder for like just a lot of great conflict between characters and just intrigue in a story. Okay, I just finished the character sheet for the love interest. So the love interest has the clearest ambition, which is really interesting because he's the visionary and he's the one who kind of has this like idea for a new world that he's trying to get my protagonist to buy into, and she doesn't want to because she's a cynic. So ambition is interesting because it's vague. It's like, okay, there's a big, big, big goal that you have, or like a dream or some change that you want to affect on the world. And you break that down into smaller goals, and those goals become the goals that drive the story. So the ambition doesn't necessarily drive the story because it's not specific, it's vague. I realized that my main character has much less of an ambition than my love interest, and because she's very, very focused on like survival and like the next step. And so, yeah, think about ambition for your characters. Okay, I've just done the character sheet for my villain. I found something I don't like about the Snowflake method, which is that it basically asks you to create this like list of things about your characters that are true. And I'm kind of like, what if I don't know if they're true or not? Like, what if it's just an idea and I'm not sure? Like, my villain, I don't know what his ambition is. What if I have like 3 or 4 options? And this method is kind of asking you to like put something down and be sure about it. So I think for pantsers, that aspect of this, of making all of these decisions, is really intimidating. But I will say, the book has this whole part on backtracking. And so it really emphasizes this idea of put something down, decide it, go forward, and if eventually you find that something doesn't work, then you do backtrack and you go back and you fix it throughout all of the steps that you've already finished beforehand. And you keep things up to date, but like don't be afraid to backtrack and change your ideas. Once we've done that, we're then going to switch back to plot and go a little bit deeper. And so for this one, you take that paragraph plot summary and you expand it to about a page, and each sentence that was in the paragraph, you then expand to its own paragraph. So now you should have 5 paragraphs explaining the plot. And for this, you're going to want to just fill in the detail. Okay, I've just done the 4th part of the Snowflake method, which is the 1-page synopsis. And I don't know why, but this took everything out of me. Okay, let's talk about it. So with this method, it gets to a point where you have to just sit down and make those decisions, and I don't like it. I figure out and I make these decisions, little decisions every single day that kind of lead to this bigger picture. And I like that. It's kind of just like this slower, like more like stream of decision making rather than like I'm going to sit here and brute force what happens. I'm like, I don't know, they always just like feel half baked when I do that. And so I've definitely hit a point where my ideas are feeling kind of half baked. So that's definitely something that I am not enjoying about this. But I will say, as much as I'm resistant to it, as much as I don't like it really helped. So I wrote this 1-page synopsis, and it was longer than a page. It was like really, really long. It was a paragraph for like each quarter, and then 1 paragraph at the beginning for like setup and stuff. I actually did figure out the midpoint disaster, and just like forcing yourself to do this actually like gets results, and that sucks, but it's true. And so I know a lot more about my story right now than I did when I started this video, so that's pretty cool. And then I had to keep going into the 3rd quarter, and then I was like, oh my gosh, so the whole bad guys close in stuff. I was like, well, I know a bunch of elements that are going to happen here, but I don't know like exactly the external plot. And I was like, well, if I know all of these elements, I can pretty much figure out the plot. And so I just did it throughout doing the narrative plotting of just writing out the story, just at an overview. I really did find some things that I really, really liked and that I think could work. So I think that really worked for me, but it was annoying. After that step, you're going to go to the 5th step, which is going to be fleshing out your characters more. And you're going to want to do kind of the same thing as you just did for plot, but for character, which is you're going to write, it's called a character synopsis. Some things to include here are motivation, backstory, what they fear, their misbelief. Interrogate why they're making their decisions and why they have those motivations, and really, really get to know them. Spend a whole page with them and see what happens. Okay, I just finished the synopsis for my 3 main characters. At first I was like, I don't want to do this because it's a lot of effort, and I didn't feel like putting that in because I'd already just like spent so long on all the other stuff, and I had just done like their character sheets and stuff. And they didn't really give me a lot of direction. It was just like backstory, motivation, kind of into like the why for like what they do in life. I thought that was pretty vague for writing a whole page on them. So basically I just went with like starting with backstory, and then I went from there. And what I realized is that like everything starts with backstory, like the motivation, like the values, like it's all in the backstory. It's how they were raised, it's who their parents were. Like at the end of each one, I was like, I could just keep talking about them, keep like making up random memories of like ways that they were traumatized. Like we could just keep going. Although I was really resistant to it at first, it turned out like to be really fun. And I just felt like proud of these characters, like where they've come from and like who they end up as. Anyway, that step is done. That took way too long. Step 6 is writing the long synopsis, and this is quite long. So this means take the page-long synopsis of your plot and turn each paragraph into its own page. So now this should be 4 to 5 pages long, explaining each act or each quarter of your story in a lot of detail and giving you time to completely flesh it out to get to know each step along the process. Step 7 is to create what they call a character Bible. I've heard of world building Bibles. I had not heard of character Bible before, but basically it's you create a super long list of everything you can think about for your character and decide it beforehand. And they think the real purpose of this is basically just to have like a sheet where everything is consistent with your character so that anytime you need to go back and look at anything, it's all right there. Keep this the most relevant information about your characters. So if you change something, go back and change this sheet. Okay, in this video, I'm going to skip steps 6 and 7 because 6 is the long synopsis. Basically, I would like to do this, but I just don't have the stamina right now. And I just did, the page long synopsis, and I figured out so many things. And I honestly feel like that is enough to get me through probably the rest of this book. Like, I feel really good about what I wrote there. I don't think it's necessary to do 5 pages of a synopsis right now, so I'm going to skip it. And then I'm also going to skip my character Bibles. Well, first of all, there's a time constraint because basically he's like, you should take one day on each character and like write down like everything you could possibly think about them. And I think that definitely could be helpful. Like, I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. I'm just saying like I don't have time, so I'm not going to do it. But like after the 1-page synopsis, like I honestly feel like that was enough. So I feel like what I'm doing is kind of finding my limit of like, this is enough detail for me. Like, I don't need to go further. Step 8 is to write a scene list. They suggest that you do this on a spreadsheet, which I think is a good idea because the way that they want you to do it is basically write one sentence that describes the scene that you'll be writing, but do it for every single scene in this book. I mean, that's pretty common, but it just sounds like a lot of work. If you do it in a spreadsheet, you can add things like point of view, a timestamp for when the scene happens so that you can get a good timeline. You can add like projected word count so you can add up how many words you're expecting to write in your whole novel. So I think it's really helpful to do it in a spreadsheet and to kind of keep track of every scene just in a really, really short description of just one sentence, what happens in this scene. Step 9 is getting really, really deep into the plot and the scenes themselves, and it gives you a way of looking at scenes that I think I like. I think I like it. I'll have to try it out and kind of see, like, as I'm writing the actual book, how this works out, but it basically gives you 2 types of scenes, either proactive or reactive. In a proactive scene, you have a character who has a goal, and they encounter a conflict, and it ends with a setback. And if you have a reactive scene, you have a character who has just had something happen and they're reacting to it. They have a dilemma and then they have to make a new decision. So it gives you these 2 types of scenes. It asks you to kind of decide which type of scene every scene in your book is going to be, and then to flesh out that scene in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the scene list has killed me because this is such a drawn out, long book, as all the books that I have ever planned or thought to write or tried to write are. And I only did half of it, starting from where I am right now, starting from the stuff I haven't written yet. Well, so it's more than half because I'm not to the midpoint yet. We'll get there very soon, but we're not there yet. So I like had to write every scene in this book. Man, towards the part where I just like don't have as much of a vision, it just really fell apart. But I will say, doing the 1-page synopsis really, 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 really helped, because if I hadn't done that, there would be just so much empty space where I'd be like, from, chapter 30 to 40, I have no idea what happens. But I was able to like put like a vague sentence of like what needs to be accomplished. And I roped that in with nine and tried to kind of plan out if it would need to be like a proactive or a reactive scene. So I like that it sets up this natural pacing if you kind of look at what scenes are reactive versus proactive and don't have too many in a row that are the same and try to alternate. What I would say is this: I have a way better idea of my story after this, but I had to make so many decisions that I'm just not confident about. And so the good news is that I have much more of a roadmap, which is what I wanted. The bad news is, well, it's not really bad news. It's just how things go. It's just that I know I'll change it in the future, and that's fine. Yeah, that was that was hard. I didn't like that. But it's definitely going to be super helpful in the future, and I'm really glad that I did it. And so I'm not going to do step 9 by itself, which is basically like really dive into each scene, because this was the most I could do. Like, this was detail that I did not think I had in me. So I've stopped at my like comfort level of detail, and there's only step 10 left, which is write the first scene of your novel and don't stop writing until you're done. For step 10, I'm already halfway through this book, so I will go forth and do step 10 for the next several months. Just write and keep writing and write some more, probably overwrite. Oh my gosh, what are the odds I get this done by Christmas? Very, very low. But I will let you know how it goes. But I honestly think, especially because of step 8 with the scene list, I definitely think that I'm going to be able to fly through this so much faster, because like once I list out every scene, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the whole book right there. Like, I do really well with having a roadmap that I can change. If I don't have any roadmap, I get kind of scared. So I feel so much better about this. Okay, glad we did this. So there you have it. That's me attempting the Snowflake method. I think it has a lot to offer. It definitely has its cons as well, like I said. But I think it really specifically has a couple things to offer, which I'll just highlight right now, which are the disaster method of plotting, looking at values and ambitions, which I'd really just never thought about before, especially the ambition one. Scenes being proactive or reactive, I thought was a really great addition to my writing craft knowledge. The process itself, which I think is just really clear cut and it bounces between plot and character, it gives you a lot to work with. And through doing this, like, I learned a lot about my story and I feel way more confident about it now than I did. And then it also offers you a chance at like really diving into narrative outlining, which is what you're doing with all of the one page and then one paragraph and one sentence and then 5-page long synopsis. That's all narrative outlining. I found that pretty valuable to try. So yeah, if you're going to use this method, let me know how it goes. I definitely think it's worth trying. And I think that I'm probably going to incorporate this into a lot of my planning for future projects. And I think it's very useful, but I also think that you definitely need to pair it with other ways of understanding story structure, because it just doesn't give you a lot of structure. And I think that structure is super, super important. But it does give you a lot about character, these other elements that I never heard before. So my review is overall very, very positive. And I think it does really well as a creative paradigm, as it calls itself. Again, as somebody who is much more of a pantser than someone who is naturally gifted at plotting, I think that this was tough to just kind of pull plot out of nowhere in like 1 or 2 writing sessions. And so I don't think that I got as much out of it as I would have if I had a plotter brain. Let me know in the comments below what creative paradigm you like to use and if something like this works for you. Feel free to give this video a like if you enjoyed the content, subscribe if you like what you see, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.